College grades and the pressure that comes with both. Kids feel the need to exceed high expectations, and the stress continues to rise. These choices might not be right for everyone. Votech, trade schools, the military, and many other options are available to us. It seems like many of my peers are only making these choices because they want to get into universities like Penn State and the University of Pittsburgh. So why is it that kids have such a narrow focus when it comes to getting an education after high school? When it comes to post-high school education, kids seem to want a thing and one thing only. Today on The Edge, we are discussing the stigma behind not going to college and whether or not college is right for everyone. Today I'm sitting with Mrs. Tiffany Kocan and Mrs. Ulf, two teachers in Peters Township High School who are here to discuss just choices after high school. How are you two?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Now the reason I had you both on the show is because you chose less orthodox colleges, I'd say. Can you guys let me know what those are?
I went to Teal College in Greenville, PA for my undergrad, and then I went to Duquesne University for my master's.
I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my undergraduate work, and I got my teaching certification from Slippery Rock University, and I've also taken some classes at California University of Pennsylvania.
And then what do you two teach here?
I teach high school Spanish.
And I teach high school English.
Perfect.
We're both AP teachers.
You do
Right.
teach AP. Mm-hmm.
Now, when do you think the stigma around not going to college started? Because I know it wasn't as big a deal, at least back in my parents' day, and my grandparents, but now it's like everyone needs to go to college. When do you think that started, and why?
I've seen it happen actually fairly recently. I believe probably within the last 3 or 4 years I saw a major shift. I don't know about you, if you've seen it, you saw it a little earlier than that?
I would say within the last decade. I think that the idea of going to college promotes getting a better job, perhaps a more solid career. And I think it also has a lot to do with the fact that it's a big business on a lot of fronts.
Right, I was going to ask, regarding colleges, do you think colleges are in some way to blame for the high pressure to go to college? Because you said it's a large business now.
Absolutely, I do. I want to first start by saying that I feel very strongly that if you are interested in an area or a content or a career that requires university, then you go to the university. But if you are interested in other aspects or walks of life, I think that other avenues are totally applicable. I think oftentimes we're equating careers with success with happiness, which I don't necessarily totally agree with.
Yeah. So some of the careers that you wouldn't necessarily go to college for would be stuff like media, arts, those kind of degrees, right? Or subjects.
Yeah, perhaps. For instance, one of my former students went to cosmetology school, and she went to a community college and got a business associate's degree, and she's doing fantastic things. She's loving life, and I think that she always knew that college wasn't necessarily an avenue she wanted to pursue, but her parents were very supportive of the decisions that she was making because they knew ultimately that success doesn't necessarily mean, it's different for different people, you know.
And to add to that, I believe that everyone is born with a gift. And I think if you don't use your gift in life, then you are cheating yourself. And I really do believe that, human beings will always need a haircut, right?
Right.
So we're always going to need hairstylists. So I think it's a wonderful career to get into. And so I just wish kids would follow their hearts more and use the gifts that they were given.
Right. When you mention that kind of stuff, what I immediately think of is all of my peers who want to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, but that's not necessarily what they want, what they actually want to do.
Right.
What do you say to the kid who lives in a more rural area, I'll say Idaho, who who wants to make movies, but obviously Idaho doesn't have the biggest media industry.
Right.
Would you recommend they go to college so they can get contacts with internships and stuff like that, or is there a better avenue for people like them?
Absolutely. I think that everyone just needs to follow their heart, and if your gift is making movies and you want to pursue that, then go move to a bigger city, study those things. But if that's not what's in your heart and that's not what makes you that's not what moves you, then don't. And I think so many of us are just focused on what brings in the most money, what looks good. And that's not necessarily the most important thing in life. I think happiness is.
But I also think that, I think there's also been a shift away from taking risks. And so I think that, and risk is a scary word for a lot of parents. I think the parents do the very best job that they can with the resources they have and the love that they have for their children. But I think oftentimes we don't allow kids to take risks on a multitude of levels. We've gone from allowing kids to walk by themselves somewhere. I think things have just changed, and I understand that they've changed for a reason, but I also think that risk-taking and maybe perhaps not having the intended outcome and pulling yourself up and assessing the situation, those are life skills that you need in all facets of life. So if you're doing something just to essentially please someone, and I've been through this, I went to school for a science degree because my parents, that's what they do. And I was 155% miserable. And when I called home and said, this is not necessarily something that I want to pursue for the rest of my life, I got some flack, I'm not kidding you. But at the end of the day, looking back, my mother and my father and I always talk about the fact that I am where I need to be.
And regarding the parents, you talked about how they need to protect their children. Do you think that by pushing college on them, that is just one more way? Because while college is not as nearly structured as high school is, it is still more structured than just sending them off into the world. Do you think that's possibly why they might be pushing for that more than just go out on your own, see what you can do?
Absolutely, and I think the easy answer is, well, Mrs. Kocan and I are both parents, and I think that every parent wants better for their children than they had. And so you do want them to go on to something that will help them be successful. You want them to be safe. You want them to be secure. But at the same time, we have to be careful that we're not pushing our beliefs on our children. So I think it's interesting because you want to do what's best for them, but at the same time, what's best for them might not necessarily be what you think is best. It might be what's in their heart.
Right.
We both had a girl who went to school here who decided to take a gap year. She and another student took a gap year this year, and they went to Panama for the year. And I remember quite vividly having the conversations with her about what people will think. Is this a good move? And she came back to visit, and she said it's the best experience she's ever had. And I think people are also very fearful of the gap year because they think that means you'll never go to college. But I think that if ever you want to travel, or if you want to experience other cultures, or if you want to gain some perspective, that's the time to do it, because you're not going to have an opportunity when you're my age or Mrs. Ulf's age. You have other responsibilities. And then when you're young, the responsibility is to yourself to figure it out.
It's funny that you bring up the gap year. I was actually having a conversation with my dad just about that last night, and he thought it was a great idea. And for whatever reason, the first thought that popped into my head was exactly what you said, which is, oh, if I take a gap year, I'm never going to go to college. Which isn't true.
If you want to.
Right. I mean, is that something that you think kids have gotten this idea in their head now? They're almost brainwashed into thinking that? Where would that come from?
I don't know. I think there's a pendulum swinging back to, when I was younger, the concept of backpacking across Europe and staying at the youth hostels was hot. It was like, wow, I really want to do that. But I've seen at least 4 or 5 students from this community who have gone to do those things and who are perhaps interested in linguistics or international politics or, just perhaps humanity. And they have come back different people, I think more mature and more ready to make a decision as to what they want to do. I think that we have this crippling idea that we're trying so hard to make it that we're not necessarily realizing what it is we're making.
Do you think that the pressure has, how do I put it, increased the work ethic of the kids at our school? I know for me personally, without that increased pressure of not having good grades and not being able to get into the right college, that I probably wouldn't be working as hard. But at the same time, that you got to balance that with how much stress you're having. Where do you think the positives and the negatives outweigh each other?
I'm going to let Mrs. Kocan take that one.
I think that a little bit of fear is a good motivating factor. But I think a large heaping dose of it is why we have an increase in anxiety. Fear causes anxiety. And so if there are specific parameters, and believe me, I hold my kids to my own children as well as my students to a high standard. I expect them to perform. But at the same time, if we are constantly pushing grades and test scores and every myriad of the adolescent life, if we're totally focusing on what they should be afraid of, we're not focusing on what their success could look like. And I think it's a problem. I do.
I do too. Mrs. Kocan shared an article with her students and also with me, and I read it. It was from Time Magazine. I know you read it as well. And I wrote down a quote from it that I love, and it goes along with what Mrs. Kocan's saying, and it says, "We need to make sure that as parents and as teachers that we don't perpetuate a fear-based understanding of success." And I do feel that fear-based understanding is permeating Peters Township High School and probably other high schools in the area, other competitive high schools.
That article was one of the reasons I wanted to have this show, and it was because I remember reading one part of it where the father had told his daughter, "I will pay you $100 in order to get a C."
Right.
And I put myself in that situation, and I honestly don't think anybody could have paid me enough, which at the time bothered me because I'm like, you're paying me money to do less work. Why shouldn't I feel comfortable doing that?
Right.
Which is why I felt like having this discussion.
Absolutely.
It's just an interesting concept.
Uh-huh.
I still don't know exactly why I wouldn't want to be able to have a C, but yeah. What are your thoughts on that process?
Well, I think, quite honestly, this is what I think. I think that C's to us indicate mediocrity. And I don't think it's anything indicative of only this area. I think in general, there's such a competitive level to get into different schools, and we pay attention to the Princeton Review rankings, and we pay attention to all of these numbers. We pay attention to a lot of numbers, but numbers, you can't quantify quality always. And so I think that the C is scary on a bunch of different levels because no one necessarily wants to be just average. But I think that it just really depends on why you are striving for the A. Are you striving for the A to learn the material? Because education to me has become transactionary. And I see that as a little bit of a problem because it's always, well, I put in this much effort and this is what I should be getting. And I don't know if we're always honest with ourselves about our efforts, and sometimes we have good days and sometimes we have bad days. We are human beings.
Right.
And I think that the quantifiability of things that are unquantifiable are problematic.
That's a good spot to stop for now. We'll be right back after a break with more discussion with Mrs. Kocan and Mrs. Ulf.
My grandfather served in World War II. Spending time with him were the best memories of my life. I became a physician at VA because of my grandfather, so I can help others like him. I can't imagine working with better doctors, or a more dedicated staff. I'm fulfilling my life's mission with the help of my team and thanks to these veterans. I'm proud to be a doctor at VA and proud to honor my grandfather every day. Search VA Careers to find out more.
Welcome back to The Edge. I'm here with Mrs. Kocan and Mrs. Ulf, and we're just going to jump right back in. Now, earlier in the show, you guys had mentioned where you went to college. Why did you choose those options instead of different colleges?
Long story short, I applied to 3 colleges, only 3 colleges when I was a senior, which is unheard of nowadays. I have students who applied to 10, 15, 20 colleges this year. I applied to Grove City, I applied to Penn State, and I applied to Teal College. I went and visited all 3 schools. I was accepted into all 3 schools, and I chose Teal, the smallest school of all 3, and people made fun of me. People asked if I was going somewhere called Thiel or Thiel, and made fun of it because it's called Teal College home, or Greenville, PA, home of Teal College. That's all that exists out there, and everyone made fun of my decision. However, I got a full ride. Based on my high school academics, I qualified to be in a competition for a full ride scholarship, and I did win that. So I've never paid for college, and that was a huge deciding factor. And also, when I showed up on my first day for the visitation, I fell in love with the campus. It was small, it was intimate. I met Spanish professors because I knew I wanted to be a Spanish major, who made me feel welcomed, who made me feel important. The programs there were excellent. I wanted a small class size. I didn't want to be a number. And before I even graduated from Teal, I was actually offered my first teaching position, which I had to decline because I was hired at Peters Township not too long after. But because of that one-on-one attention that I received, and because of the opportunities, the resources, small class size, looking back, I would not have changed my decision for anything. And I got my dream job right out of college. I'm here.
Perfect.
Just to piggyback off of what Mrs. Ulf is saying, I looked at a bunch of different options, and Slippery Rock had for me essentially the same thing that she's speaking of. I had a very, very close connection with the professors. Before I graduated, I had the opportunity to present at 3 national conferences with my professors. And at some of the other schools that I looked into, which were good schools, I just didn't feel like I would have gotten what I needed to jump into this profession, because when you start your first day as a teacher, and I remember very vividly this happening, standing in front of the first period class saying, I'm responsible for your education, a portion of it at least. It's almost like parenthood when you look at a child and say, I am responsible for you. Right. So I think that the one-on-one interaction, the continued ability to have opportunities that wouldn't have been offered at different schools, those were the biggest motivating factors beyond, financial, et cetera. And this was my first job as well. And I've had actually, I had an opportunity or 2 around the same time when I got hired here, but I'm very happy here, and we think that I know I can speak for you, I think our skill set is appropriate for what we're doing.
Yeah. And you had mentioned that you had fallen in love with the Teal campus.
Right.
I was talking to one of my friends a few weeks back now. She said she wanted to go to NYU Law, but that cities stress her out.
Right.
And so I automatically said to her, well, then you probably shouldn't go to New York City because it's going to stress you out. And her response was, but it's NYU Law.
I know.
Why do you think it is that kids are willing to sacrifice their comfortability with a campus for the school?
Well, unfortunately, I think the name of the school is a huge driving force here. I think the name matters here, unfortunately, now. And I'm not saying that that's 100% a bad thing. I had a student in class recently just tell me, the reason we want to go to these big name schools is because we worked so hard our entire life, and we want to go to a school that reflects the work that we put in to these last 12 years. And I totally understand that. However, if it doesn't feel right to you and it's not going to give you what you need to be successful, or you feel uncomfortable there, I would highly suggest that kids do a little bit more research.
Beyond what its ranking is.
Right.
And I think the other thing that I find very interesting too is they go to a ranking and then they apply there with maybe not having visited several of the schools. And so I think sometimes, you can't go to every school and visit. I understand that. There are limits. But I think that narrowing down the focus a little bit and saying, what opportunities beyond me being in a 300-person lecture hall does this university have for me? So I'm not just advocating smaller schools.
No.
I'm advocating, I think, human interaction with the faculty or the teaching assistants or the resources or the opportunities. I'd like for kids to start looking maybe at packages rather than just pedigree.
Right. And I had mentioned a little bit in the opening about alternatives to college, such as VOTEC or the military.
Right.
I mean, even today, those are still not exactly, once again, they're not looked up at as much as colleges. But they were, in my opinion, they probably work just as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you always need a plumber, a mechanic, an electrician,
A mortician?
a hairdresser, a chef.
Right.
I think that oftentimes, I'm amazed. I actually have a student in my AP Line class who goes to VOTEC in the afternoon. And I was having a conversation with him, and he's really enjoying it. And so I think there's also this stigma and enigma. How could he be in an AP language class and at the VOTEC at the same time? Well, everyone needs to be able to communicate. And he's kind of pursuing something that if he wants to pursue it right after high school, he has the ability to be gainfully employed. And then perhaps he'll say, you know what, I want to do this, or maybe I want to go into business. He has some mobility. And I think sometimes we don't look at those situations as definitively as we should.
Right. And there are so many options, but I mean, I know in my experience, I keep hearing about the major schools, and that's it. How am I able to look at the smaller schools or get more information on those? I mean, obviously there are websites, but I just feel like the bigger schools are constantly throwing the information at you, and you can't get past it.
Via email or via a snail mail. I know that Naviance has some abilities. I know that some of my kids have used Naviance to kind of navigate where they are interested in going. I also think, and I suggested to some of my kids earlier this year, that they take the ASVAB, because the ASVAB test also gives you some understanding about some of your passions or strengths. And it doesn't work for everyone, but I think it's another avenue that you could perhaps look at. So immediately, that's what I would say. The immediacy of being in this building and what you have at your disposal. The other thing is, I know the counseling office has tons of visits. They have schools coming in here all of the time. I don't know how highly they're attended.
Yeah. I honestly don't know how highly they're attended either, probably because I'm not hearing about them, but
I know that they have, there are very, and even the board by the library, there are some schools there that I'm kind of like, wow, I had never even thought about this place.
Right. Going to college fairs, stopping by different booths that maybe the name isn't as recognizable as the others, but seeing what they have to offer.
Why is it that kids don't feel the need, not necessarily to look for those, but I mean, do you feel that it's the parents who don't necessarily push these small colleges, or is it the school? Where along the line do you miss those?
Personally, I think that if it's a parent's first time at the rodeo, that you do what everyone else does. We'll be better equipped because we're in a high school. But I feel for the parents who this is their first kid, and you have a conversation at a barbecue, and the mother walks away and goes, I don't even know what to do. I think it's kind of crippling. A resource for parents, I think, would be beneficial, because then they could guide. You often talk to your friends, and if you have children the same ages, you have a lot of common conversations. And so I think that sometimes things are overlooked from those perspectives because it's more of a word of mouth kind of thing, I would think. Beyond all of the ratings and everything else.
When it's all said and done, let's be honest. We were just talking about this. Does it matter where you go to college? Some people would say yes, and I think to a degree, yes. But it doesn't really matter where you go to college. Just in my experience, and after teaching for 14 years, you've been teaching for 18, we see where our students end up in life. Their score on an AP test, I barely remember. I often don't remember it. I remember what they do after college. If you work hard, if you're passionate, if you show up, if you're, right?
If you're
responsible, if you are a people person, if you're trustworthy, responsible, have a strong work ethic, it doesn't matter where you go to college. Those things will land you a job, and you'll keep your job, and you'll be respected in your profession.
I think going back to the fact that if you stumble sometimes and you're able to pull yourself up, those are the lessons that build character. And I think without the perusal of life and without the opportunities to look at what is available to you and actually try to do those things, I think it's more difficult for you to make a decision that's purely your own without any outside influence.
That's the perfect message that we should be ending on. Just making sure that kids know that they don't have to go to college, or if they're going to one, it doesn't need to be the best. It's the person they are that matters, and that's how you get places in the world. Thank you both for being here with me. Thank you again. I hope today's episode of The Edge has helped some of you take a new look at whether college is right for choice for all kids. Trade schools, going into business for yourself, and plenty of other options are available instead of attending a university. Because college isn't right for everyone, and the way kids stress over getting into it is an unhealthy and detrimental. Thank you for tuning into The Edge. We'll see you next time.